question, please?
Hazur, my question about revelation of Holy Quran revealed to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Right.
And Hazur, I want to ask that there is any resemble to revelation to our beloved Imam Mahdi alayhi salatu Islam, because many verses also revealed to Imam Mahdi alayhi salatu wasalam.
You see, as far as the revelation goes, the authenticity of the revelation remains exactly the same, whatever the name of the recipient from among the prophets be. All prophets to whom Allah speaks, He speaks with authenticity. And as such, all human beings are understood to respect each prophecy and each revelation, equally in that sense that they're all from God. As far as the quality of revelation itself is concerned, it varies from prophet to prophet, because it is not just a question of who reveals, it is also a question of who receives. If you have a better quality receiving set, the quality of reception would be higher. In that way alone, the revelation of Hazrat Aqdas Muhammad Mustafa stands above every other revelation in quality and clearness. And no other revelation can be compared with his. This is the solution to the apparent problem that in one place the Holy Quran declares, La nufarriqu baina ahadin min rusulih. It's a confession by, or profession by Hazrat Muhammad Rasulullah and his followers, La nufarriqu baina ahadin min rusulih. We will never differentiate between prophets and God, of God, whoever they be. They will be the same as far as their authority from God is concerned. But at another place, the Holy Quran declares, Tilka rusulu faddalna ba'dahum ala ba'd. These are prophets of Allah. Some we have elevated above others in ranks. So the ranks are a different issue. The authenticity of the Wahy and the respect expected of people to whom it's addressed is a different issue. From that angle, Hazrat Masih Maud has clearly said that there is no difference between my Wahy and any Wahy to any other prophet. But from other points of view, he categorically declares that Muhammad Rasulullah stands above every other prophet of God, far beyond in fact. So this should be properly understood, that when he speaks of Wahy of the same type, he speaks in support or in explanation of the verse of the Quran which I have just quoted. When he speaks of the issue of ranks, then he always declares unambiguously that he is the servant, the follower, and the perfect spiritual son or perfect spiritual slave of Hazrat Muhammad Rasulullah. As far as the revelation in the words of the Quran is concerned, this is not a new phenomenon. It is well recorded in the Ummah, even among those who were not prophets, even not Mujaddideen. They have been receiving Wahy from Allah exactly in the words of the Holy Quran. And sometimes that Wahy changed a little bit here and there. And ulama of that time or the following time did not object to it. But when the same verses of the Holy Quran are revealed to Hazrat Muhammad Masih Maud, they suddenly find exception. There is no reason why to differentiate between one phenomenon, one expression of the same phenomenon with another expression of the same phenomenon. That's not just. So as far as the revelations of the Holy Quran repeated to Masih Maud are concerned, this is done to emphasize a certain teaching of the Quran. At various times, in various situations, various verses of the Holy Quran come into special play. they apply specifically to certain ages and certain situations. And because Hazrat Masih Maud had to serve the cause of the Quran in so many ways, and beyond 1 century, at least for 1,000 years, he was to serve the cause of the new requirements of the ages. So obviously, the wahi of the Quran had to be repeated to him far more than in any other case from among the Ummah of Muhammad Sallallahu. And that is exactly what has happened. Right?
Hazur.
Have I covered all aspects of your question?
Hazur, Jazakumullah.
Thank you.
Okay. My question is why that Muslim communities
Of course, that is a
and
short
leaders
question, please.
are not united between each other?
Be seated and I'll speak. Be seated, please. Take your seat, I'll answer you.
Okay.
Right. Before my Eid. Right. You see, the question is short and the answer is not very long either. The divisions in Islam took place after the demise of Hazrat Muhammad Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. The simple reason was that they drew different inferences from the same verses of the Quran and same traditions of the Holy Prophet. One scholar disagreed regarding the interpretation of some verses of the Quran and some traditions. Now, to begin with, these differences were resolved because there was a central leadership in Islam under the title of Khilafah. As long as Khilafat continued, no sects came into being. But when, unfortunately, the nema of Khilafah was lifted from the Ummah because of there being ungratitude on the part of people, and Allah shows His sign of anger by lifting the Khilafah. The result was there was no one afterwards to keep them together. And the differences which evolved gradually gave birth to different sects. Now, to begin with, it was not as bad as what followed later on. In the beginning, the differences seemed to be genuine and honest. And as far as they remain genuine and honest, there is one tradition of Hazrat Muhammad Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam which covers them and gives them support of a sort. Hazur Akram Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam once said, "Ikhtilafu ummati rahmatun." As far as it is the Ummah of Muhammad Rasulullah Sallallahu, that is the righteous people who follow him with honesty, if they disagree, this happens. And the things begin to evolve through differences. But when the differences become a product of one's ego, one's personal display of his authority over others, then a difference which is born out of a non-muttaqi mind always leads to deviance. And that is what began to happen later on. Now we have reached a stage where all the Ummah, so-called Ummah Muhammad Rasulullah Sallallahu, is divided and split. And this is exactly what has been predicted by Rasulullah Akram Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And in that particular prediction, he disowns these people as if they never belonged to him. One particular hadith which you must have read well, I quote, which says, "Sayati ala nas zamanun la yabqa min al-Islam illa ismuhu," as you see today, "wa la yabqa min al-Quran illa rasmuhu." An unfortunate time would come when Islam will be left only in name. وَلَا يَبْقَى مِنَ الْقُرْآنِ إِلَّا رَسْمُهُ, and the Quran will be no more but for writing, for scribing. Like you see, you hear every other day somebody has written the Quran with a thread of gold and this and that, and only the artificial, superficial view of the Quran is displayed. The meaning is forgotten. It no longer runs in the blood of the human beings. that is Muslims. That is the meaning. La yabqa min al-Qur'ani illa rasmuhu. Masajiduhum amiratun. As you see, so many mosques filled with people. Wahya kharabu min al-huda. But they will be empty of guidance. When these things happen, when Hazur Akram sallallahu alaihi wasallam dissociates himself from the Muslim leadership of that period, and referring to them he says, ulama'uhum sharru man tahta adim as-sama. He doesn't say ulama'i. Ulama of those people will have nothing to do with me. They will be the worst people under the firmament of heaven. So this is the answer to your question. It was destined to happen that way because there was no longer the central leadership, either under prophethood or under Khilafah, to keep resolving these issues and have the Ummah united. What was the answer? What was missing? It was an authority appointed by God. So to put the Ummah back into order and bring them under one united leadership was the only answer, but it could happen only when God sent somebody. And this exactly is the prediction of Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu, that Imam Mahdi would appear. He would be appointed by God himself. Messiah would come, who would be a leader appointed by God, and they would be provided with special powers from Allah and light from Allah to bring the Ummah back to one central leadership. We believe as Ahmadis that that process has started. It started around 100 years ago, and that Imam Mahdi and Messiah has come, and he has started the process of reuniting the Ummah, bringing them one after the other together under the one banner of Khilafah which he left behind. And this is what you are seeing as a phenomenon which is continually progressing forward and spreading wider and covering the entire globe. So this is my short answer to your question, please. And I would turn to the second questioner.
Hazur, is this on? It's working?
Yes.
Okay. I just send greetings from Canada, from the people of Canada.
Right.
And I'm a guest. Mr. Jamil Butt invited me today.
Right.
And late Munir I met today.
Thank you. You're most welcome.
And I feel most welcome. And it's a pleasure. And I've been fed well here. And I see you're fun-loving people. And I don't want to ask any hard questions or heavy questions, you know.
Anything. You're most welcome.
My wife had one question. She feels out of place a little bit.
Is she here, sitting among the ladies?
Yeah, no, she's here among the men.
I see. Where about? Over there. Oh, yes. Why didn't you ask your question yourself? Huh? You could have come forward and, okay, please.
I'll ask her question first, then I'll ask another
Please.
question.
Okay.
We're not acquainted with your customs, and I know amongst our gatherings in our assembly, the women and men meet together, and she was wondering why it was different. Maybe you have no room, and she also she reached out her hand to shake a man's hand, and it was not accepted.
I'll explain that.
Okay.
Thank you. Please be seated. You see, you have already suffered enough with a permissive attitude towards the interrelationship between sexes. You have reached a stage where instead of asking me the question, you should have been capable of answering the question yourself. The fact is that the free interrelationship has pushed the society in the direction of a single-minded pursuit of voluptuous pleasure, and there is no denial of that. It has reached a stage where nature has already started punishing the permissive society. In so many ways, it has been punishing the permissive society for the last so many hundred years. But now it has reached a stage whereby, as if the nature would exterminate those people who do not listen to the call of nature and the call of morality. For instance, there was gonorrhea to begin with, then came syphilis. They thought they had fought enough with syphilis, and it's very surprisingly, they were just sex-related diseases. The bacteria, the virus could not spread through any other means. So it was not the result of natural meeting of husband and wife. These diseases were only result of irregularities of contact between man and woman. And it was permissiveness which helped them spread like sometimes wildfires, even in America. An attempt was made to counter these threats, and the doctors thought, we have got over it, no more of such nuisance. Then came syphilis. When it was suppressed, it went deeper into the system. People thought they had done away with it, yet it went into the basic human cells. And I'll come with the proof of this statement later on. Then there came herpes, that is the sex-related herpes. The doctors cured it, and the same patient suffered again and again and again. It was not like herpes zoster, which once cured leaves you forever. It went on causing suffering in response to the pleasure, the unlicensed pleasure which people got before. So much so that it offset the pleasure by a large margin. And still people have not been able to recover from it enough when you are confronted with AIDS. Why should not we read a message in that? There is a continuous history of a series of punishments meted out by nature just to the attitude of permissiveness. And things are going out of our control. You know how many people already suffer from AIDS? Perhaps you don't know the figures, but I can tell you that according to some census of the experts of the medical team, it was said that in America, perhaps at least 30% of people have already become carriers of AIDS. It may not have got activated as yet, but it can remain dormant in the system for 8 years continuously without raising its head. So a time may come when, due to some global catastrophe, due to some pollution in the air or something, these dormant cells are suddenly activated and this disease becomes epidemic, not in its dormant form but in its active form. All this is due to permissiveness. How many homes are broken today in the most advanced societies of the world? How much trust is lost between husband and wife? Is enough not enough? What price do you have to pay? Very little. Try to meet the challenge in the beginning. So when you do not promote free handshakes between unknown men and unknown women, then this is the first preventive measure which is taken against a society which has that intrinsic tendency. to go further and go beyond limits. When ladies are kept in a separate place, it is not they who are kept in a separate place, it is men who are kept in a separate place. The dangers flows from men to women. You see? So men are kept apart from women to save the women from the ugly looks of men. And there is no stopping that. You see, in churches, what happens? Men and women pray together. And when they go to church, they go all best dressed up, with most beautiful clothes on, with all the lipstick and makeup, as if God is waiting for their beauty to be shown physically to him. The Holy Quran speaks of a different type of beauty. It says, take your taqwa, the inner beauty, when you go to the mosques. So the result is that they cause distraction. When we gather here in the mosque to pray to Allah, and when we are men alone, there is no distraction. Because also we don't have a gay society among us. All the measures are taken in Islam to suppress that tendency. So with the result that everybody who comes to the mosque, he comes with the sake of having a union or communion with Allah, and he is not distracted at all. So also women are free. They can say their prayer freely, they can bow to God, they can prostrate to earth, knowing that there is no wicked eye watching them from behind. And they do not have always to be taking care of how they look and how they dress. They can simply go walk from the house to the mosque. But when they go to the streets, they have to take special care. Then the natural tendency among women to display their beauty stops them for a while, and they say, all right, let's do the makeup before we go to the shop for the shopping. What for? Why do they make up? What are the shopkeepers to them? Husbands are in the house. If they want to look beautiful, they should look beautiful before the husbands, not to the unrelated people. So these are deeper issues of human psyche which have been attended and answered in Islamic system of human relationship. And they should be understood in this broad vision. For the time being, let it suffice. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum, Hazur.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
There is a question from a lady guest from Detroit.
Yes.
She says, I have read in some hadiths about the followers of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that they have seen the seal of the Prophet in the form of some lump or tumor between his shoulders, between the shoulders.
You see, I have also read about such traditions which deal with this, but when you read the Quran, these ahadith are not supported by the Quran at all. You see, if they mean to say that there was a seal on the back which was imprinted on the prophets, how can you build the scenario? It becomes totally meaningless. Now, this much I can give, that maybe there was a symbolic something to show a sort of seal. But when Hazrat Muhammad ﷺ is mentioned, it is not said in the Quran that he bears a seal. It is mentioned that he is the seal. Now, there is a world of difference between the two things. The Holy Quran says he is the seal. And these traditions say he bore a seal. And that seal could not be imprinted on the characters of the prophets. It's impossible. But Muhammad Rasulullah's character could be imprinted upon the prophets, and that is why we know that that prophet who is in conformity with the general character of Muhammad Rasulullah, he is the only true prophet. The one who is in disagreement with the general character of Muhammad Rasulullah, is a false man. So this is the meaning of seal. So the whole person of Hazur Akram Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is the seal of prophecy, not just one single, birthmark or something. So because people want to take things literally overmuch, and they don't want to go into the deeper meaning of the spiritual messages. So it is easy, just a plaything they're looking for. And such people with these superficial attitudes, they highlight these traditions and we don't know when they came into being. After all, they were collected 200 years or sometimes 400 years after the demise of Muhammad Rasulullah. So I don't know about the chain of authorities which quote, but I know this is a fundamental inviolable principle, that if any tradition is contradictory to a clear statement of the Quran, then either that hadith has to be understood in conformity with that statement of the Quran, or it should be rejected, not as a word of the Holy Prophet, but as not being the word of the Holy Prophet. The word of the Holy Prophet could never contradict the Quran, so such ahadith are rejected as false. So either somebody should come with this solution whereby I could see this hadith to be in conformity with the verse of the Holy Quran which says, "Ma kana Muhammadun aba ahadin min rijalikum walakin Rasulallahi wa khataman nabiyyin." Muhammad is khataman nabiyyin. A khatam is not being carried by Muhammad Rasulullah. So when somebody comes with a meaning, then I'll be able to answer that question, not before that. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum, Zur.
Assalamu alaikum.
Clean Bhatti from...
Yes, of course.
I believe on the same wavelength as what we were
You
just...
fill your pockets, every pocket, with such care. No empty space is permitted to go waste.
Well, actually I have about 20.
Pardon?
20 pockets.
20 pockets.
Everywhere.
So you must have been carrying scores of things.
Lots of film, cameras.
Yes, good, okay.
Hazur, a question regards Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam,
Yes.
who we were told in a hadith by it was in Abu Dawud,
Yes.
in his grave. The Sahabi asked, "Ya Rasulullah, how will
Respond to.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, how will you know of this invocations
That
when
I
you
know.
have mixed with the dust?"
Yes.
Now the question arises in my mind,
No, what was the answer? First finish the hadith, full hadith.
but the hadith, yes. Rasulullah sallam said, "The earth has been forbidden by Allah to damage the bodies of the prophets."
Right.
That is my question.
Yeah.
If you could shed some light on that. Does that go against nature? Does that go against the Quran?
You see, we know from the study of the Old Testament that the bones of prophets were carried in a sacred box, which did not have any flesh on them. It is not the bodies which are mentioned, but bones of the prophets. So this hadith has to be understood in conformity with the history of prophets. The best answer which comes to my mind is the answer which was given already by Hazrat Abu Bakr Siddiq Radhiyallahu Ta'ala Anhu, that God will not bring two deaths upon you. He would not let your body die and disintegrate, and also your message die and disintegrate. So perhaps Muhammad Rasulullah was referring to this second part, that the message of the prophets is never permitted to disintegrate until it has reached its conclusion. And in that sense, there is no question to be asked. We know that the message of Muhammad Rasulullah is still alive. Apart from that, it is possible that some bodies of some people are preserved by Allah by some natural factors. And of that we hear that sometimes some bodies were unearthed, or even after 100 years, and they were sort of mummified by nature. So I do not deny the possibility of some prophets of Allah having been treated by nature in the way we find through our common experience. And I believe if a body can be preserved or could be preserved, Hazrat Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alaihi wasallam's body stands the best right to be treated like that. But that is only a belief. We don't know, we can't say anything. As far as his spiritual body is concerned, we can say with greatest certainty that it will never be permitted to disintegrate, and if it is forgotten and left out, then we will, as Ahmadis, we bring it again together, and this is the attempt, the effort we are making, we are dedicating ourselves to achieve. Another thing, this interpretation of the hadith was not supported by some other scholars, because in one roya of Hazrat Imam Abu Hanifa, he saw that he is digging the grave of Hazrat Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and he sees the bones spread out and disorderly, and some bones which do not belong to him are there as well. So he picks up bone after bone and says, this is the right one, this belongs to Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and puts back in the grave and rejects some bones as not belonging and throws them out. Now this dream was related to some other scholars of the time. It was very beautifully interpreted, but the issue I am raising now is, nobody said that this dream is satanic, because Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam body could never be disintegrated, and you are talking of bones, so this dream has to be a satanic dream. When it was interpreted, then Hazrat Imam Abu Hanifa understood the message. It was interpreted that God will give you the wisdom and light to separate the wrong ahadith from the right ones, for usage in the inferences you draw relating to Islamic jurisprudence. So in your fiqh, God will give you special insight to find out which were the words of Muhammad Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and which were just related to him but did not really belong to him. And this dream came to be true in that sense so beautifully, so clearly. The whole history has given the evidence in favor of this interpretation. So some spiritual things are to be interpreted, and one should not overmuch emphasize certain physical elements of these things, physical aspects of these things, which you cannot testify anyway. Why waste your effort and energy? How many graves of the Prophet you are going to dig to find out if they are intact or not? Right?
Right.
Thank you.
One more small one in regarding to the same
Not like the small question of whether Isa Khan Sahib. Please.
On behalf of my mother who asked, and I remember you did,
Beg pardon?
on behalf of my mother,
Okay.
the question arose, and I suppose Hazur did touch on the subject of this on a khutbah a few weeks ago, that Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam used to pray the torment of the grave, Qabr ka azab. We are unclear as to what that is.
Spoken at length on this issue, repeatedly, and also I think during my question relayed through television. So you better wait for that question and session to be released for the sake of Americas, and they will begin to come to you inshallah within next 3 months, not 3 years.
Jazakumullah.
Inshallah. Next please.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
My question is a
And
short
who are you, by the way?
Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Shahid Bahari.
Yeah.
My question is a short question, but it can have a very broad answer. And it's almost a two-parter. How would you convince someone that's very rational, scientific, but very stubborn on the existence of God and the importance of believing in God?
You see, this question, as you rightly said, requires a very, very long answer. But first of all, tell me, how can you establish your own existence?
For myself, it would be, to convince myself that I exist, it would be very easy, but to convince somebody else that I exist without actually...
Will become problematic perhaps.
Exactly.
That's right. And particularly for those who have not seen you, who have not heard you, who have no access directly to examine you. Can you prove your existence to them?
At this stage, I don't think so.
Okay. Now, when you said scientific, let's first understand the jargon scientific. I'm going to answer it on your behalf. Science as against arts is a system of knowledge which deals with demonstrable facts. The facts which can be demonstrated and repeated. Under the same circumstances, they must give the same results. Which means you must have a demonstrable commodity or entity before you and examine it. Can you say the same of God?
No.
The way God is described, or He describes Himself, He goes beyond our reach to catch Him, to hold Him in files of scientific laboratory and examine Him.
There's no parameters.
So there is no question of scientific evidence at all, from under the strict terminology of science. Now, conviction. Let's come to that part. You are still convinced of so many things of which you have no scientific proof. That is to say, you have no scientific knowledge enough yourself to even examine a so-called proof. You see, there are people in Afghanistan who don't know the ABC of physics and chemistry, and yet they believe in radio, in even television. Why do they believe? Because they receive the signals in the form of audio or video, pictures and sounds, and they can't deny. So if messages are received, they become an evidence, but not necessarily reproducible evidence. Because in cases of most people, they can't even understand the phenomenon. How can they work on it and reproduce it and satisfy themselves? So hearing and seeing become instruments for expanding your knowledge and taking you into the realm of the unknown. Right? Now, when you come to the question of God, there's so many possible ways of reaching a positive conclusion as to the existence of God. There are two things mentioned in principle by the Holy Quran. The one is the study of the afaq around you, the horizons before you. That is the objective study. And the second is having an introspective study with reference to your own self. And when you spread these arguments and into various sections, then so many chapters appear dealing individually with one aspect or another of the evidence in favor of the existence of God. But that would be a very long answer again, as I told you. But I'm coming to the last bit. I refer to you to study yourself introspectively. You have a will. You have a vision. You can reach out things beyond this hall. You can reach out the extremes of the space through your imagination. Could dead matter do the same thing?
No.
Why not? What is the difference? What is vision? What are five senses? Do they belong to chemistry or physics?
Yeah.
No. If they belong to the chemistry and physics as such have played their part for the last 20 billion years. And man or the life on earth has come to be born only like a small infant in relation to the time spent before.
Okay.
This chemistry and physics is common to all the universe. And yet you do not see signs of their displaying these qualities.
Okay, I see.
You see?
Yeah.
They're not innate to them.
No, okay, I see what you mean.
If they were innate to them, they should have shown them. Something extra has happened. Consciousness is something which is not a part of chemistry or physics. That has been born, and that is you. And consciousness is related to five senses. If there were no five senses to help consciousness, consciousness would be dead. So an ear is created, an eye is created, a sense of taste is created, which all lack in the dead matter. So study the five senses in relation to your consciousness, and you begin to see a new world emerging, which could not have emerged out of nothing. So the question you face is only twofold. Either you are eternal, or you are created. There is no third option. You are not eternal, but you are organized, and organized in such a beautiful manner, with such perfection, that it requires an organizer, but a conscious organizer, not a dead organizer. Because the other day I also addressed this question very briefly. In answer to a question I said, output can never be greater than input. So in the input of the universe there is no consciousness. Where did it come from? And when you see organization, it requires some pre-knowledge and pre-consciousness. It's lacking. So the question is only twofold. Either you are eternal with your consciousness, which you are not, or something else is eternal with his consciousness. You cannot do away with eternity. It's impossible. If there is no God, then the dead matter has to be eternal.
How would you address, because I've got this response many times, of that we're just random, and I've never been able to answer.
Please, instead of diverting the attention, please stick to this question and face it.
Okay.
Confront it.
Okay.
Are you eternal or not?
Definitely not.
No. Is your consciousness eternal or not?
No.
How could you be organized if you are not eternal? There has to be preceding you an eternity which must possess consciousness, because consciousness could not be born out of non-consciousness. So there are just two options. Either the unconscious beings or dead things are eternal, or some live form is eternal. There is no running away from this. Do whatever you may, please. You can't escape this inevitable question. If consciousness, your consciousness is not eternal, then there has to be an outer consciousness which has to be eternal, and that is God. But this is a brief answer. Please, you wait for a small booklet which is written on the question of God for children's sake. wait for it to be delivered to you, and you study it, and you will find many interesting discussions on the subject. We can't prolong the same question indefinitely in a forum where other people also should be given the right to ask their questions, right?
Yeah, I understand that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Jazakumullah. How badly? Ashik Mahmood Sahib Ghumman is expected to report where?
Registration desk.
To the registration desk, please, immediately. Ashik Mahmood Ghumman should immediately report to the, already, right. Yes, please.
Assalamu alaikum, Hazur.
Your name?
My name is Rahan Qureshi. I'm
Yes.
from the Brampton Jamaat.
From?
The Brampton Jamaat.
Right, right.
My question today is about life after death.
About what?
Life after death.
Right.
One of the hadiths of the Holy Prophet ﷺ says paradise is everlasting. My question is, Hazur, how do we perceive the benefits of this paradise? I'm sure it's in a spiritual sense rather than a physical sense. Could you just explain a bit more on that?
Do you understand Canadian English? Please. Could you? They have not understood. How could I? I'm a visitor to Canada. Please. Would you repeat your question? Loudly
My question
and
is,
clearly.
it says, one of the hadiths of the Holy Prophet, that paradise is everlasting.
Everlasting.
Yes.
Right. This I have understood. The question.
The question is, how do we receive the benefits of this paradise? I am aware that it is more a spiritual way rather than a physical life. Could you just explain how it is more spiritual?
You see, I wish you had read Hazrat Masih Maud-Salam's epoch-making book, the most revolutionary book of the modern times, Islami Usul Ki Philosophy, the philosophy of the teachings of Islam. There, one question of the 5 deals exactly with this subject. So you read it and you will get the answer, inshallah. Right? Jazakumullah. हैं? थोड़ा सा और एक दो बच्चों को कर लेने दें। नहीं, मगर हो सकता है ईसा जान साहब को और सवाल करना हो। You see, have you heard, Isa Jan Sahib, have you heard that famous Persian couplet? Darmayane qare darya takht bandam kar deyi baz mi goi ke daman tarmak hun hushar bash. They have put me in front of questioners like you, and they want me to take care of time as well. It's simply not possible. Please sit down.
Assalamu alaikum
Yes.
warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, Huzur. My name is Khalid Sharif Shad. My name is Khalid Sharif Shad, and I have one question. I am from North York Jamaat.
Huh?
My question is, Huzur. Okay. My question is, Huzur. According to the prophecy of Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad Qadiani that there would be Ahmadiyyat in the world, when is it going to be?
Malik Lal Khan understands your language better than anybody else.
Masih Islam has prophesied that Islam would be the religion of the world. When would it be? When would
Right.
it happen?
If you had read a few sentences on, the answer would have been found there. He has explained that well within 300 years from the time of this prophecy, Ahmadiyyat with the grace of Allah would represent Islam, and all other versions of Islam would be subjugated and would become small as compared to the Ahmadiyya representation of Islam. And that would spread all over the world, and non-believers would exist, but only as small minorities, as remnants of the past. like animals before human beings, are still retained by nature, but with a relevant insignificance. So, Messiah Sallallahu has already said there, where you read this from, that this would happen well within 300 years, inshallah. We've entered the 2nd century, and don't you see the change in the wind and the air, and how rapidly Ahmadiyyat is now spreading with the grace of Allah? So we have witnessed the beginning of the prophecy in the 2nd century, and we can well believe that inshallah within our lives of all who are sharing this hall with me, we'll see Ahmadiyyat progressing so rapidly that a few years ago you could not dream of such a thing. Inshallah, please. And that seems to be the last question, right? For tonight. Inshallah, we'll sit again tomorrow. Tomorrow again we'll sit here, so those who are left with no opportunity to ask a question, wait till tomorrow. Now somebody should say azan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.